They called him the quiet one, the amateur who showed up 3 months ago with clean gear and no stories. The full-time crew barely learned his name. He answered their questions in 2 words or less, never raised his voice, never pushed back, and never told anyone where he had been before he showed up at that small desert fire station 8 miles from the border. What nobody knew, what nobody could have known, was that the man quietly folding hose on Bay 2 had neutralized armed units in 4 countries before most of them had finished their fire academy. That was about to matter, a lot. He signed up as a volunteer 3 months ago. Nobody asked where he had been before that. His name on the roster read Marcus Reyes. Just Marcus to the crew of Station 11, a 3-bay volunteer and part-time house sitting in the dry scrubland of Presidio County, Texas, roughly 8 miles from the Rio Grande and about 40 miles from anywhere that felt like civilization. The nearest city was an hour away on a highway that cut straight through desert so flat and bleached it looked like the surface of a dead planet. Station 11 served a scattered population of ranchers, border patrol support workers, and a handful of small business owners who had never left. It was not glamorous work. Most calls were brush fires, medical assists, the occasional rollover on Route 67, nothing that would make the news, nothing that required anything beyond basic competency and a willingness to sweat. Marcus had both. He showed up on time, every time. He did what he was told. He cleaned equipment with the kind of thoroughness that bordered on obsessive. He checked his gear twice before every call without being asked. He drove the engine smoothly, positioned it correctly, and never blocked potential escape routes, which some of the full-timers occasionally noticed without saying anything about it. He passed his Texas State Volunteer certification on the first attempt with a perfect written score, which the training officer, a stocky former city firefighter named Derek Holt, mentioned exactly once, in a tone that implied it was probably a fluke. Derek Holt had been with the department for 11 years. He was good at his job, and he knew it, and the knowing of it had calcified into a particular kind of arrogance that most of the crew found manageable as long as you didn't challenge it directly. Derek ran drills sharp and tight, tolerated no nonsense on scene, and had a long memory for slights and a short memory for compliments. He had decided within the first 2 weeks that Marcus Reyes was a liability. It wasn't anything Marcus had done wrong. It was everything he hadn't explained. Where had he worked before? Marcus had said he traveled a lot. What kind of work? Logistics. For who? He just shrugged. Derek didn't like shrugs. Derek liked resumes and references and men who could explain themselves. The quiet ones made him nervous. Quiet ones had things to hide. You watch him on drills, Derek told his senior man, a wiry firefighter named Paul Torres, one evening in the bay. He moves different, like he's thinking about something we're not. Throws me off. I don't trust guys who think too much during drills. Paul Torres watched Marcus from across the bay. Marcus was repacking a trauma bag with the kind of methodical efficiency that looked almost mechanical. His hands moved without hesitation. Everything went back exactly where it had come from, placed rather than pushed. Paul didn't say anything. "He's going to freeze when it counts," Derek continued. "Mark my words. Guy like that, no real job history, shows up out of nowhere. That's not a firefighter. That's somebody hiding from something." Paul watched Marcus zip the bag closed, stand, and begin rechecking the engine inventory without being asked. "Maybe," Paul said, and left it at that. The other volunteers picked up on Derek's attitude the way people in small stations always do, not because they agreed, necessarily, because the social cost of disagreeing was higher than the social cost of going along. So Marcus ate lunch alone most days. He answered questions about protocol clearly and was ignored during casual conversation. He showed up for every scheduled shift, every call, every drill, and was treated like a temporary inconvenience that had not yet had the decency to leave. He did not seem to mind. Or if he did, he never showed it. He moved through the station with a stillness that some people found unsettling and others simply never thought about at all. He slept in the bunk room on his assigned shifts without complaint. He read technical manuals during downtime. He ran 7 miles every morning before the shift started, returning exactly on time, not sweating as much as anyone would have expected, his breathing already settled by the time he walked back through the bay doors. One evening, 2 months into his time at Station 11, a rookie volunteer named Jenny Castillo watched him disassemble, clean, and reassemble the hydraulic cutters faster than she had ever seen anyone do it, faster than the department's own certified operator usually managed, and without looking at his hands. She started to say something. He caught her looking, gave a small nod, and went back to the secondary tools. She didn't mention it to anyone. She filed it away. She would think about it later. That was late September. The wildfire season had been building for weeks. The Rio Grande Valley had taken less than half its average rainfall by August. The brush was dry down to the root. Wind advisories had been running 3 days straight, and the National Weather Service had the entire county under a red flag, warning that showed no signs of lifting. Every station in the region was on elevated readiness. Everyone knew a major call was coming. They just didn't know it was going to be the worst kind. The call came in at 14:22 on a Thursday afternoon. Brush fire, 7 acres, and spreading fast 3 miles south of the station in the direction of the river, driven by a 30-mile-per-hour southwest wind moving northeast, toward 3 occupied ranch properties. Station 11 got the call as first response, with mutual aid from Marfa requested, but 40 minutes out. Derek took the engine. Paul drove the tanker. Marcus and Jenny rode in the engine behind Derek. 2 other volunteers, Ray and Cole, took the brush truck. They were wheels out in under 4 minutes, which was fast for a volunteer house, and Derek knew it, and it meant he was in a good mood by the time they hit the Tulane County road heading south. The fire was visible before they were a mile out. A dirty orange wall climbing above the brush line, leaning hard in the wind. The smoke was thick and brown and moving fast, pushing northeast exactly as the Weather Service had said. Derek called in a size-up on the radio, requested aerial reconnaissance from the county, and began his suppression approach. What he could not see from the road, what none of them could see yet, was what was moving just inside the smoke line, 800 meters to the southwest. They set up on the south end of the fire at 14:36. The engine positioned on the road shoulder. Paul anchored the tanker 200 meters back. Marcus and Jenny pulled a tack hose. Ray and Cole pushed the brush truck into the scrub to work the flank. Derek took command position near the engine, radio in hand, reading the fire the way a man reads a paper he has already read several times, with confidence, but not with his full attention. The fire was moving fast, too fast. Within 12 minutes of arrival, the northeast spread had accelerated beyond the initial estimate. The 3 ranch properties were now within the fire's probable path within the next 40 to 60 minutes. Derek called for an evacuation order on the nearest property and radioed it in. He shifted the engine's position to protect the road access point. Marcus was working the hose line 20 meters into the scrub, pushing water against the fire's southern edge when he stopped. He just stopped. Not because something scared him, because something registered, a sound that didn't belong, then a shape at the edge of the smoke, then another, then a third. His eyes did not widen. His breathing did not change. But every single thing inside him shifted into a mode that had nothing to do with firefighting. He dropped the hose nozzle, not panicking, deliberate. He turned and walked back toward the engine at a pace that looked unhurried and was anything but. His mind was already counting, already mapping, already calculating angles, distances, fields of cover, exposure points. 3 armed men had emerged from the smoke line to the southwest, moving in loose tactical spacing, low profile, not ranchers, not border patrol, weapons visible, tactical vests over civilian clothes, moving toward the road with the practiced, economical movement of people who had done this before. Behind them, barely visible through the smoke, at least 2 more. Marcus had seen this spacing before. He had used this spacing before. This was not a wildfire response anymore. He reached the engine. Derek was on the radio facing east, tracking the fire's northeast spread. He had not seen the southwest. "Halt!" Marcus's voice was low, level, not loud. Derek turned with the impatience of a man interrupted mid-thought. "What?" 4, possibly 5 armed individuals approaching from the southwest through the smoke. 42nd ETA to this position. Tactical movement. Cartel. Derek stared at him. "What are you? Get everyone to the north side of the tanker. Now. Do it now. Do not get on the radio again until I tell you." Marcus was already moving, past Derek, toward the brush truck storage compartment on the near side of the engine. Paul, get down. North side, go." Derek had not moved. Reyes, what the hell are you? Derek! The voice that came out of Marcus Reyes at that moment was not the voice of a quiet volunteer who ate lunch alone. It was the voice of a man who had commanded human beings in environments where an incorrect word meant a body bag. It was not loud. It was absolute. Get your people behind the tanker. Tell them to get low. Do not pick up the radio. I will explain everything in approximately 6 minutes. Move. Something in Derek Holt's 11 years of emergency work responded to that voice before his pride could stop it. He moved. He started calling his crew without fully understanding why, pulling Ray and Cole back from the brush line, waving Jenny toward the tanker. His brain was catching up to what his instincts had already processed. Marcus had already disappeared around the front of the engine. What happened in the next 4 minutes was something that none of them witnessed directly. They were behind the tanker, pressed low against the north side of the vehicle, listening to sounds they could not entirely interpret. The crunch of boots on dry ground, a brief exchange of voices in Spanish that cut off sharply, a single hard impact sound. Silence. Then, 2 more sounds in quick succession. Then, silence again, longer this time. Jenny Castillo, crouched behind the rear wheel well of the tanker, found that she was not breathing. She was thinking about the hydraulic cutters. She was thinking about the way his hands had moved. Paul Torres was on one knee, one hand on Ray's shoulder, keeping the younger man still, his own face unreadable. He had been in emergency services for 9 years. He had responded to 2 fatality accidents and 1 active shooter situation, where he had waited outside the perimeter with the rest of the civilian responders. He had never felt the particular quality of silence that was currently pressing down on the desert air around them. This was not a wildfire silence. This was something older. 4 minutes and 17 seconds after Marcus Reyes walked around the front of the engine, he came back around the same corner. His gear was the same. His breathing was the same. There was a small abrasion on the back of his right hand and a slight discoloration on the left side of his jaw that had not been there 4 minutes ago. He was carrying 3 flex cuff restraints he had pulled from the engine's emergency supply kit, and in his other hand, he was holding a radio that did not belong to Station 11. He looked at Derek Holt. 5 individuals, all secured, 2 with minor injuries from resisting, no gunshots fired. Their transport is 130 meters southwest, a white Ram 250 behind the tree line. I disabled it. He held out the confiscated radio. You can call the sheriff now. Tell him you have a cartel interdiction situation. Tell him you need federal notification. Tell him the fire is secondary until you have law enforcement on site. Nobody said anything for a full 3 seconds. Derek Holt, 11-year veteran, department senior man, the man who had spent 3 months telling anyone who would listen that Marcus Reyes was going to freeze when it counted, was holding his radio and staring at a man he did not know at all. "Who are you?" Derek said. Not aggressively, not anymore. Marcus looked at him with something that was not quite patience and not quite distance. "I'm a volunteer firefighter. Make the call, Derek." Derek made the call. What comes next is where the story gets deeper, because when Sheriff Roy Delgado of Presidio County arrived on scene 22 minutes later, lights, 2 deputies, back up from the county road, he walked to the front of the engine where Marcus Reyes was standing watching the western horizon for additional movement, and he stopped dead. Roy Delgado was 61 years old. He had been a sheriff in border country for 14 years. Before that, he had served as a liaison officer between the Presidio County Sheriff's Department and several federal agencies he was not supposed to name in casual conversation. He had sat in rooms with classified briefings. He had read documents with names on them that were accompanied by redaction bars and clearance levels he had not been cleared to access fully. He knew one of those names. He stopped in front of Marcus Reyes and looked at him for a long moment. Marcus looked back. The same stillness, the same economy of expression. "I know who you are," Delgado said quietly, not for anyone else to hear. "With respect, Sheriff, you know a name on a document," Marcus said. "That's not the same thing." Delgado was quiet for a moment. He looked at the 5 secured men sitting in the scrub 20 meters away, flex-cuffed and attended by one of his deputies. He looked at the confiscated radio in the evidence bag his second deputy was already filling out. He looked at the disabled cartel vehicle visible through the thinning smoke behind the tree line. "Force Recon," Delgado said, still quiet. Marcus said nothing. Served in the Marines Force Reconnaissance Units, 3 combat deployments, classified operations in multiple theaters, listed as separated from service 2 years ago under circumstances that are apparently above my pay grade to know about. Delgado paused. Am I in the ballpark? I'm a volunteer firefighter, Sheriff. Delgado almost smiled. Almost. Son, I have been in this county for 14 years. In that time, I have had 2 confirmed cartel incidents on this side of the river. Both times, federal involvement, multiple agencies, weeks of preparation, and the outcome was... He stopped. He looked at the 5 men. You did this in under 5 minutes, alone, with fire hose fittings as your only assets. Marcus was quiet. I'm going to need a statement, Delgado said. I understand. I'm also going to need to make some phone calls. I think some people are going to want to know you're here. I would prefer they didn't. I imagine you would. Delgado looked at him steadily. Mind if I ask why a man with your background is volunteering at a 3-base station in Presidio County? For a moment, the stillness around Marcus Reyes shifted. Something moved behind his eyes. It was brief. It was real. I needed quiet, he said. Delgado nodded. He seemed to understand, in the way that men who have seen enough of the world understand things without needing them, explained. He didn't push further. He turned and began directing his deputies to process the scene. Marcus turned back to the fire, which was still moving northeast and still needed to be fought. He picked up the radio. Station 11, this is Reyes. Fire is still active on the northeast vector. We need to resume suppression. Tanker needs to reposition. I need the brush truck back on the south flank. There was a pause. Then Derek Holt's voice, quieter than usual, came back over the radio. Copy that, Reyes. Repositioning now. It was the first time Derek Holt had ever said his name on the radio. What Marcus Reyes had spent 3 months keeping buried was now, in some form, out in the open. Not all of it, not even most of it, but the edges of it, the shape of it, and the people who had ignored him for 3 months were now doing their jobs in an altered silence, a silence that had a different texture than before. The fire was contained by 1840, 4 hours and 18 minutes after initial response. The 3 ranch properties were preserved. No civilian casualties, no structure losses. The cartel interdiction produced, over the following 72 hours, a seizure of 47 kilograms of fentanyl precursor chemicals that the 5 individuals had been escorting through the brush, the disruption of a supply corridor that federal agents had been trying to identify for 6 months, and a series of federal notifications that reached, according to one source who spoke to Sheriff Delgado informally, 3 separate federal agencies and 1 office he declined to name. All of that came later. That night, Marcus Reyes sat in the station bay after the equipment was cleaned and restocked and the report was written. He was alone. He was rechecking the trauma bag, the same one he always rechecked with the same methodical efficiency that Jenny Castillo had watched 2 months earlier. He was thinking about a man named Sergeant First Class Dominguez. He thought about him most nights. Dominguez had died in a scrubland that looked a lot like this one, 8 years ago, in a country far from Texas, in a situation that Marcus had planned and executed, and that had gone correctly until the 43rd second, when it had stopped going correctly. The investigation had cleared Marcus. The investigation had said there was nothing he could have done differently. Marcus had read the investigation 6 times and never once believed it. He zipped the trauma bag closed. He placed it back in its position. He went to the bunk room and lay down in the dark and listened to the desert outside and told himself, as he told himself every night, that eventually the quiet would be enough. That eventually the work itself would close over what was underneath it, the way scar tissue closes over a wound, not erasing it, but covering it, making it functional again. He almost believed it on the better nights. That night was a better night. The next morning, Derek Holt arrived at the station at 0600. Marcus was already there. He had been there since 0500. He was running inventory on the engine, a task that did not need doing, that he was doing anyway. Derek stood in the bay and watched him for a moment. Then he walked over. He stood beside the engine. He was quiet for longer than was comfortable. I owe you one, Derek said. He said it to the engine, not quite to Marcus. You don't, Marcus said. I said some things. You didn't know. That's not— Derek stopped, started again. That's not really an excuse, is it? Marcus stopped what he was doing. He looked at Derek Holt, 11-year veteran, man who had spent 3 months treating him like an inconvenience, and he looked at him without judgment. Not because he had forgiven him, exactly. Because he had stopped expecting people to understand what they had no access to understanding. That was a different thing from forgiveness. It was closer to acceptance. "Buy me a coffee when we're off rotation," Marcus said. "We're square." Derek looked at him. He nodded once, slow. "Yeah," he said. "Okay." 2 weeks later, Sheriff Roy Delgado drove out to Station 11 on a Tuesday afternoon when he knew Marcus would be on shift. He came alone in his personal vehicle, not the county truck. He sat in the visitor chairs outside the bay and drank bad station coffee and talked to Marcus for 40 minutes. Some of what they discussed was on the record, related to the incident report and the ongoing federal process. Some of it was off the record entirely. What Delgado offered, quietly and without pressure, was a position. A new role that he had spent 2 weeks working to create, partly by calling people he hadn't spoken to in years, and partly by leaning on a federal contact who owed him a favor from an incident in 2012 that he was not going to describe. The position was an unofficial one, a border security liaison and threat assessment specialist, working with the county sheriff's department and interfacing with federal border protection agencies on a voluntary, classified basis. "You'd still be a firefighter," Delgado said. "I wouldn't take that from you, but you'd be more, when we needed you to be." Marcus looked at the desert. He looked at it for a long time. He had come here for quiet. He had come here to stop being the person whose name appeared on documents above redaction bars. He had come here because he was tired, and because Dominguez was dead, and because the person he had been in service felt like a version of himself he was no longer sure he had the right to be. But something had happened when those 5 armed men walked out of the smoke toward his people. His crew. The crew that had treated him like nothing for 3 months. He had not thought about Dominguez or clearance levels or classified documents or his own exhaustion. He had thought about Jenny Castillo crouched behind the tanker not breathing. He had thought about Paul Torres keeping Ray still and calm. He had thought about people who were in danger they couldn't see and couldn't fight, and his body had done what it was built to do before he made a single conscious decision. That was the thing about what had been built into him. It did not belong to him alone. It never had. He looked at Delgado. "I'll need operational independence," he said. "Understood. I won't carry anything on shift." "Agreed. And I choose when I'm active. I don't get activated by committee." Delgado nodded. "That's the way I drew it up." Marcus looked at the desert again. "Then yes," he said, quietly, simply. "Thank you," Delgado said. "Don't thank me yet." "I'm going to anyway." Over the following 6 months, Marcus Reyes became something that did not have a clean job title or a clean description. Officially, he was still a volunteer firefighter at Station 11, Presidio County. He showed up for every shift. He cleaned equipment with the same thoroughness, ran the same 7 miles every morning, kept the same distance from people that had always kept them from getting close enough to ask the wrong questions. But he was also other things. He consulted on 3 threat assessments for the county. He identified 2 additional cartel access corridors that had been invisible to conventional observation. He trained 4 members of the county sheriff's department in close-quarters threat response with no weapons, a 2-day course he designed and ran out of a ranch property east of town, and that the 4 deputies described individually and without comparing notes as the most demanding training experience of their professional careers. Jenny Castillo, who had said nothing and filed things away and thought about hydraulic cutters, asked him once, 6 months after the fire, if he would teach her. He thought about it for 3 days. Then he said yes. She was the first. She would not be the last. 1 year after the incident at the brush fire near the border, the Presidio County Sheriff's Department instituted a new civilian contractor protocol for threat assessment in rural border emergencies. It was the first protocol of its kind in the state of Texas. Sheriff Delgado presented it at a statewide law enforcement conference in Austin, and the model was adopted in modified form by 4 additional border counties within the following 18 months. The protocol did not name Marcus Reyes. It did not name anyone by name. But in the room at that Austin conference, sitting in the back row in civilian clothes, was a man who arrived alone and left alone, and who, when the session was done and the other attendees were networking and exchanging cards, stood briefly in front of the framed program slide that showed the protocol's core framework, a framework he recognized because he had written most of it on a legal pad in the Station 11 break room between calls, and read it once, quietly, to himself. Then he left. He had an early shift. The trauma bag needed checking. There are people walking among us who have carried weight the rest of us cannot imagine. They do not announce it. They do not wear it where it can be seen. They take jobs that put them near the work, near the fire, near the emergency, near the moment when everything could go wrong, because that is where they feel most like themselves and least like the version of themselves they are trying to outrun. They show up on time. They do what they are told. They are too quiet, too careful, always watching. And the people around them call it strange, call it suspicious, call it a liability, until the smoke clears, until the moment arrives that only they can meet. True competence does not need to announce itself. It waits, and when everything goes sideways and the people who doubted it most need it the most, it is already moving. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment and tell us what you think Marcus should have done with the quiet life he came looking for. Should he have kept hiding? Or was what happened at that fire line exactly what he needed? Tell us in the comments. And if you know someone who carries something heavy without making a show of it, share this story with them. Sometimes a story says what we cannot. If you want more stories like this, border emergencies, hidden heroes, the moments that reveal who people really are, subscribe right now. We have more coming, and the next one is going to stop you cold. Hit the bell so you don't miss it. We'll see you in the next one.